you for that lovely welcome. And it's wonderful to see everybody. It is, in fact, you said bright and early. It's still dark and early here. Lovely to be with all of you. Let's see, are you seeing my slides now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Good. So I just wanted to take a few minutes to share with you something about the origins of the 6 conditions framework and this idea of conditions thinking, and how the idea of conditions thinking can really help us to make excellent choices about how we enable great teams. So I'm going to take you back into a little bit of history of how Richard Hackman and I and our colleagues at Harvard and other institutions developed the 6 conditions framework and what its implications are for how we intervene in systems to create really brilliant collaborations. So I'm sharing with you here one of my very favorite quotes from Richard Hackman, who is a Harvard professor and my closest colleague in the creation of the 6 conditions framework. And he's saying here, I have no question that when you have a team, the possibility exists that it will generate magic, producing something extraordinary, but don't count on it. I don't think this was Richard actually being pessimistic about teams or about the possibilities that that teams offer, but more so what he was doing is acknowledging from our research and intervention in the world that creating great teams actually takes great intentionality. It is not something that just happens by combining a bunch of good people and saying, go off and do great things together. And so I want to take you through some of the common sort of assumptions and models about what it takes to have a great team, and then talk about how we arrived at conditions thinking as a way of really enabling the effectiveness of collaborations in the world. So I have an image here of a common image of leadership. One of the common assumptions that Richard and I frequently came across both in the research literature, but also largely in the popular press, is that what it takes to have a great team is a great leader. In fact, it's such a commonly held assumption that Richard and I coined this term, the leader attribution error. It's the tendency to explain anything that goes on in a team, whether it's good stuff or poor stuff, by attributing it to the hands-on leadership, the coordination, the real-time action of the team leader. And I'm sure you're familiar with the phenomenon. Anytime a team, for example, a sports team has a good season, we cheer the excellence of the coach, and when they have a really losing season, we fire the coach. I mean, that's a classic example of the leader attribution error. Now, I don't want to sound as if I am against the idea of leadership being an important driver of what creates an effective team in the end. But we arrived at a very particular idea about what team leadership is. And it is not the hands-on coordination and real-time leadership of the actions of the team. It has a very particular flavor to it when we look at the 6 team conditions model. I also want to share with you, I've actually often used this particular question as a poll in talks that I have done with various groups. What do you think is the most powerful point of leverage for improving a team's effectiveness? I'm going to share with you some of the common things that you will see out there. So building trust between the leader and the team members as a point of intervention, working that relationship. Developing psychological safety in the team so that people feel low levels of risk and fear and are less likely to self-censor in their actions. Resolving existing conflicts that might be interfering with the team and its work, or establishing a compelling purpose for the team and then keeping them together long enough to accomplish something meaningful together. And I think you can see that fourth perspective here kind of stands out a little bit from the other 3 in terms of the kinds of approach it's suggesting. In fact, the first 3 ideas are really about intervening directly in the dynamics and the relationships in the team. Whereas the 4th one is acknowledging that the behavior, the dynamics of a team are actually driven by something. And that is, in this case, some elements of the team structure. So conditions thinking is ultimately going to be acknowledging that the kinds of behavior that we want to see in teams is an emergent process that comes out of the structures that you create. So two conditions thinking and what we see as the really important distinction between conditions thinking and this sort of process intervention, process model of approaching teams. When Richard and I investigated the research literature, what we were finding was that while there's lots and lots of evidence for certain kinds of processes to be strongly related to team performance, for better or for worse, those process models were turning out to be very poor guides for practical action that could actually improve team performance effectiveness. So for example, a process outcome model, we see lots of trust in teams, teams do better. We see lots of conflict in teams, teams do worse. Process outcome models are very common characterizations of the relationship between team dynamics and performance. Some more sophisticated models you see in the literature also add inputs, right? So there are differences in the kinds of tasks that people do. There are differences in the way that the team is composed. These might be inputs or structural features. And those too are also related to processes which ultimately drive outcomes. When you look at the research literature, what we see is that there's lots and lots of evidence, correlational evidence of different process outcome relationships. So as I said, trust is positively related to performance. High conflict is negatively related to performance. There are many, many other processes or dynamics that we could look at that are related to the team effectiveness outcomes for better or for worse. We've also seen plenty of evidence that certain kinds of inputs are related to certain kinds of processes. So for example, different kinds of team tasks will induce different levels and different kinds of collaboration in a team. But unfortunately, what we could never find good evidence for is that directly intervening in process through the hands-on coaching around team process actually improves the outcomes of teams. In fact, one of Richard's and my favorite article titles ever is an article by a professor by the name of Robert Kaplan. And the title is "The Conspicuous Absence of Evidence That Process Consultation Improves Team Task Performance." So now that I've given you the title, you don't actually have to read the articles because the bottom line is actually in the title itself. It was a meta-analytic review in which Kaplan looked at all of the different studies that had been done of attempts to intervene directly in the process of teams, and finding that in many cases, there's no evidence of improvement in performance. In a few cases, there was some evidence, but not strong evidence of improvement in performance. And alarmingly, there were quite a few cases when process consultation and the intense concentration on improving the dynamics of the team actually undermined the team's performance. Probably not because better processes are actually worse for performance, but because teams get so distracted and so intensely into improving the relationships and the dynamics in teams that they may actually forget about the task and actually getting the work done. So then where does the leverage lie? Where is the point of leverage that we can find that reliably makes a meaningful difference in the effectiveness of the collaborations that we care about? And this is where the idea of conditions thinking comes in. It's a very different way of asking about what are the primary influences on team effectiveness and where does the leverage lie? What we began asking in our research is what are the handful of deliberately designable conditions, structural features of teams that most powerfully influence both the processes that emerge in teams and the outcomes that we care about. A handful of designable conditions that you can intentionally put in place. The turn of phrase I like to use is they stack the deck in favor of a team becoming a great performing unit. A team is not a machine, it's not a mechanism, it's a complex social system. And so we can't make a team be great, but we can increase the chances that a team will actually chart its own course to greatness if we create the healthy conditions that will enable it to do so. And ultimately that conditions thinking created what you've come to be learning and working with as the 6 conditions framework. So in essence, what we have said is, yes, input, process, output models have a lot to teach us about how teams operate, but the primary point of intervention is not that middle term. It's actually in the intelligent preparations, the design work that we do to get the structural features of a team into the best possible shape. And so ultimately, the answer to what it takes to have a great team is we discovered 6 conditions that collectively increase the chances of having a great team, 3 of which we came to call the essentials, because fundamentally they must be in good shape if you want to have anything good come out of a team at all. And then 3 things that we came to call the enablers, because they accelerate the development of a fundamentally well-designed performing unit into a better and better team over time. That's the nature of what is different about this model and what we came to see about the practical answer to the question of what it takes to have a great team. So I want to share just 2 practical implications of that and then open it up to questions. Richard and I crafted this heuristic in our work over time that we came to call the 60-30-10 rule. And what we mean by the 60-30-10 rule is that the implications for team leaders is that 60% of the most critical actions that they can take, 60% of the most important things that you can do for a team happens before a team even exists. It is in the design work that you do, in thinking through, do I really need a team at all? And if so, what for? How will I communicate the purpose to this team in a way that helps them understand the consequences that it has for their stakeholders? Who can actually contribute to that purpose? What resources will they need? What kinds of norms and work practices will actually support and enable the work? That's the design work, right? That 60% of the leadership actions are in those intelligent preparations ahead of time. 30% is in breathing life into that great design work the first time that a team convenes. It's in launching or ultimately in relaunching as things change over time, the team, and helping them come to terms with their purpose and the resources that they have to draw on, and including the knowledge and skill that exists in the team, and becoming engaged with their priorities and the work. 10% is the hands-on coaching, right? The real-time intervention and coordination and improvement of the actual dynamics of the team. So 60-30-10, I had said earlier, we're not actually against team leadership, but we have a different perspective on it, which is that what great team leadership really is about is thinking as a designer and then getting your team off to the best possible start. So the last idea I wanted to share is this notion, as Barry had said in the introduction, we like to think about the science and the art of great teams and of team coaching. The science is in knowing what the conditions are. The art is in helping teams really grapple with those conditions and to act on their own structures in ways that get those fundamental conditions and the fundamental design in the best possible shape, rather than focusing primarily on those emergent processes in the absence of some attention to making sure that those structural conditions are in great shape. So that's the nature of the 6 conditions framework. I opted not to go into the details about the framework itself, since I know you've been working with it in the course of your work in this workshop. But let me pause there and see if there are questions and reflections from the group that you would like to share. I also am sharing with you some resources if you want to do some additional reading and investigation of the 6 conditions framework.